listeners that is joining me tonight. I see that you brought them over. Thank you for that, Chris. So tonight's topic is again Russia and Ukraine, as it was last time. But today I'm actually focusing on something that I'm not qualified in at all, which is military tactics. A few months ago, I was on Big Daddy Liberty with Chris Wyatt, and he advised everyone, don't listen to the 5-minute experts on Fox News and CNN because they're going to tell you whatever you want to hear, and nobody has got any details of a Russian battle plan at the time. So I'm actually now referring to Chris. Chris, what do you make of military-wise what's going on in Ukraine?
Well, it's a fascinating situation, and I think that it shows an awful lot of the weaknesses of the Russian military. These were some weaknesses that would, as an intelligence officer who was responsible for following the Soviet Union during the Cold War and for being a subject matter expert on it so that we didn't get wiped out in a conflict. I'm very familiar with how that military was designed and what its intent was and how it's developed. And the thing is that for decades, we sold the Soviet Colossus as just that, threat. Now, that doesn't mean they're not a threat. That doesn't mean they're not dangerous. I mean, a lot of people are dead as a consequence of this invasion. But the big Russian bear, its weaknesses are being exposed. The fact that it's common to gang rape recruits in the barracks, that really undermines morale and esprit de corps and discipline. And people aren't going to go and die for you when
is that a systemic thing in Russia?
It is. It's a systemic thing in the military. It's a very common situation in which recruits are gang raped. Happens frequently and not talked about. Now, I was on another broadcast with a Worldview, I think it was, with a gentleman who's and also a subject matter expert. Well, he's specifically a subject matter expert on Russian military. And he said, yeah, he confirmed exactly what I said. He said, no, Chris is right. It's exactly something that's quite common. But the weaknesses here, what we're talking about is leadership weaknesses, a stratified command structure in which initiative is not encouraged, which has never been encouraged either under the Soviets or even under the Russian military before that. It's always a top-down hierarchical thing. And, the strength of the U.S. military, although we have a lot of problems at the moment, but the strength of the U.S. military, and the Army in particular, and the Marines, has always been that we've empowered our non-commissioned officers. Unlike other militaries, non-commissioned officers have tactical level responsibility and authority to do things, and they make a difference in a battle. We're not seeing that here. One of the things I'd say about the Russians, it's very clear, is that they have, and I made this criticism when we were on Big Daddy Liberty a while back, and I've been making it ever since the start, is that why do you open up a conflict on 7 fronts simultaneously? I mean, that's just insane. At least when the Nazis came across the border, it was on a united front across thousands of kilometers, but they were all coming.
When you say several fronts, I remember in the beginning they attacked Kiev, for example. They obviously attacked the Donbass and they attacked the south. No, wasn't it maybe just the case that they used one front as a distraction? That's
you're asking
that people have been made about the Kiev because it wasn't. I mean, they failed. If they tried to take Kiev at the beginning, they failed at that.
Well, what you're saying is they were trying to do a feint.
Yeah,
that's a term. Well, there were 2 major prong attacks that came from the north towards Kiev on both sides of the river. And as I argued all along, their intent was never to catch Kiev. That wasn't their intent. They obviously weren't masked and they weren't positioned to do that. They were maybe trying to threaten it to, I suspect that what Putin wanted was for Zelensky to cower before him. He wanted him to cower before him and make some territorial concessions and some concessions for Russian minorities. And despite all the nonsense about NATO expansion, because what do we got now? NATO expansion, exactly what Putin claimed he didn't want. Sweden and Finland are in NATO almost. So for me, but that's 2 prongs. They also came from the northeast into, and then they had 2 different axes of advance into the Donbass, at least possibly 3, depending on what we saw. And then they came up from the Crimea. And then they also tried a naval assault and coming from further west. So that's like 7 different fronts. I mean, maybe my numbers are off slightly, but I'm remembering from the morning of the 23rd of February when I was in Orlando as this broke, and I got to my hotel room, and it was because of snafus with the hotel and their key card system. I didn't get in my room till 1:30. Turned my TV on, and while I was firing up my laptop, I was going to get a shower because it's all grimy from the travel. And Russia has invaded Ukraine. The president will speak in 12 hours. What? 12 hours? Somebody wake him up from his nap. Take his diaper away from him. What the hell's going on here? 12 hours he's going to get up? What kind of leader of the free world is that? And so I went online and did a 90-minute broadcast, and you can go back and watch that video, and I stand by my assessment that night. But anyway, yeah, so I'll get back to I think you have a question. I'll get back to the weaknesses in the Russians. There's more of them, but go ahead.
Yeah, so, I mean, from what I've now gathered, they have taken Luhansk, liberated it, Russian terminology here.
Yep.
They controlled most of it, I think, anyways, before that. So that's one argument. They have taken the south, close to Crimea. It's questionable how far they've got into Donetsk, but essentially they don't seem to have made that much ground in, what's it now, 120 plus days already?
That's a fair assessment. Yeah, their advances are pretty limited and exposes a lot of issues. Number one, if this was well planned, there should have been very well coordinated attacks between the Russian separatists in the Donbass region, in Luhansk and Donetsk, and the separatist republics. They should have been lockstep and in coordination and in communication with Russian forces. It's pretty obvious that if they were, they're idiots. I don't think they were well connected to them. And that's part of the problem. They're operating independently. The Russians have shown that they are not very astute at combined arms operations. You would think they would be. In the Second World War, they got good at combined arms operations between T-34s being supported by infantry and artillery, massed artillery. All of that played a massive role in breaking and crushing the Wehrmacht and the SS and their allied forces from Romanians and Hungarians and Spaniards and everyone else that was on the Eastern Front. That just obliterated them because they combined arms operations. And that was the whole concept behind their doctrine to invade Western Europe, was combined arms. So I don't know where that went, but we find tanks sitting in cornfields not supported by infantry and being taken out by javelins and by drones and things like that because they're exposed and there's no one out there, no air defense supporting them, no mutually overlapping supporting fires. This is like a textbook case on how not to run a war. I mean, the level of incompetence in the Russian forces is insane. Now, early on, people were making big things. Well, they've been stopped. And I'm like, it's been 72 hours. Take a breath. Operations don't go. But after 4 months of campaigning, and we can take a look at this and make some assessments now. It's fair to make assessments that the Russians aren't getting it done. And you're right. They haven't made much in the way of territorial advances. My argument is that I always was of the opinion, based on what little information we had, that what Putin was really looking for was to occupy the eastern third of the Ukraine up to the Dnieper and then annex it.
Including Kiev, or you would?
No, on the east side, just on the east side of the Dnieper, up to the Dnieper, just annex that eastern third of the Ukraine, not Kiev, but take the eastern third and then annex it or make it a client state, one of the two. That was my expectation. Now, I don't think that was his initial goal. I think he just wanted a compliant government in Ukraine, in Kiev. He's got it in Belarus. I mean, they're just bootlicking sycophants. They'll do what the Russians want, and that's what he wanted in Kiev. And the only
there's stories now of Belarus wanting to join Russia as well.
Yeah, now that's been bandied about a lot since they first became independent in the 90s, but it's getting a lot more currency right now. And the only bootlicking happening in the Ukraine is Joe Biden licking Volodymyr Zelensky's boots. That's the only bootlicking we see, and celebrities, making their calls to Kiev. But the Russians have been, look at their tank losses. Do you see any T-90s? No. T-90s.
The Javelin is really making a difference there. I mean,
it appears to be the case, but not just the Javelin, but other anti-tank weapons, the Bofors that have gone there from Sweden and others, the anti-tank weapons, the Germans and the Brits have also all had an impact. And I think that those came at a crucial time for this conflict, when it was possible in the early stages for Ukraine to be disorganized. And if Russia had coordinated combined arms attacks, they could have made huge advances, but they didn't. There's no blitzkrieg involved here. Why? And you don't use armor unless you're going to advance. And they have squandered their armor. They've lost probably hundreds of tanks, if not 1,500 more.
But I don't understand. I mean, and look, I can't get into Putin's mind. I don't think anyone does. But they only went in with 100,000 troops. Ukraine's army is 250,000 strong to begin with. So you go in with a 3-1 disadvantage. So that's why a lot of people say they're not interested in taking anything outside of Luhansk and Donetsk, for example, maybe Crimea, that area. But yet they went in with a hell of a lot of tanks and artillery. So it just doesn't entirely add up,
Well, what it appears to me is people are delusional and seem to think that the mere presence or threat would be enough to cow Ukraine. And that's why I said I think they want them to cow and be a client state or a vassal and do what they're told. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, you go back and look at the arguments that Putin was making. First off, Ukraine can't become part of NATO. We're not going to allow this. Well, if you conquer Ukraine, NATO just got right on your doorstep because you move all the way west and you're touching Poland and Romania. So that does
incorporate Belarus. It's on your doorstep,
Exactly. So that makes no sense whatsoever. So that was a red herring in my view all along. They don't want them in NATO. That's a fair statement, but that's not the justification for invasion. That's not why they did it. This came down to a number of factors. And frankly, I go back to the initial point. Russia has always been paranoid about its security. It's a landlocked country with virtually no access to water, certainly no warm water access. You can count Crimea, but I mean, it's locked up in the Black Sea behind the Dardanelles and Bosporus. That's hardly accessed. And even through outside the Dardanelles and Bosporus, there's still not really a blue water navy because they got to get through either Suez or Gibraltar to get into the real blue water stuff. So, I mean, Vladivostok, they're no impact on the world out there. So they're historically been a landlocked country, and that has driven their paranoia. Plus the constant invasions the Russians had to deal with the Mongol hordes coming through there, the Tatars. It's
the fear of all the those European countries. I mean, it's something that I it's coming from Africa that I didn't appreciate getting to Europe, is that the fear of being invaded by a land army is real. When you speak to somebody from even Sweden, which you don't consider to be a war country, but it's in the back of their minds, the Russian base is coming to invade, and the Russians have the same paranoia about it. So the argument that I think you made this before this war started out, it was going to break out, was Ukraine should have looked towards Finlandization, which was a sensible policy.
Yeah.
Do you think anything of that is even remotely possible right now?
No, it's not possible now because Zelensky is in it to burn the country to the ground. And Putin is in it to burn the country to the ground at this point. Now, maybe that's not their intent, but that's what they're doing. And this whole thing's being fueled by idiots who are fueling this. Do you see any here? Ask this question: $60 billion of foreign assistance, most of it military aid to the Ukraine, had that been given before Putin put 70,000 troops on the border in early 2021, or when he did it, do you think we'd have a conflict? I would argue no. Had there been joint bilateral exercise between U.S. Special Forces and U.S. Air Forces flying in and out of Ukraine in the year preceding the invasion, there would not have been an invasion. There would have been lots of bellicose complaints by Putin and threats to NATO and this, that, and the other, but there wouldn't have been a war.
So you're actually arguing that NATO expansion would have prevented a war?
No. I didn't say NATO. I said bilateral U.S.
Okay. That's an important distinction.
That's a very different distinction there. Bilateral U.S. engagement with Ukraine in a very open manner would have been very effective at deterrence. That's very different than expanding NATO. And there's no need to expand NATO. I think expanding NATO Ukraine is foolish. Why should we be on the hook to defend Ukraine? What do we get from Ukraine? Nothing. I'm still hearing about all this nonsense about how there's a global shortage of wheat. They said that on February 23rd. It wasn't a shortage of wheat because of invasion. It just happened. It's wintertime. There's no wheat being harvested in Ukraine in February, idiots. And oh, by the way, here in central Pennsylvania, I'm going by field after field after field where the wheat is being harvested right now in July because it was planted last winter before this invasion took place. Isn't that interesting? We got plenty of wheat here. We don't import wheat.
Well, the other one is gas. I did an interesting podcast here with Rudolf Huber, who is, I think you know Rudolf Huber. He's a president of LNG Europe. Anyways, he said to me, Russia invested a lot of money in the Yamal Peninsula to extract gas and LNG there. And it was 10 years ago. So he said he had all documents, so take this into account. The Germans made an assessment and said, look, this is a bad investment from Russia's point of view. And it might be that Russia in the coming future would have imported gas as unbelievable as it was, despite having reserves and struggling to get it from the cold north. So Russia's ability to produce gas, supply gas to Europe going into this war was significantly overestimated, I think even by Western analysts. So anyway, long story short, the gas issue, it's an issue for Bulgaria. It's an issue maybe for Germany, but it's not as big an issue as being made out as well.
Analysts have overstated Russia's ability here. Now, the problem we have with Russia, of course, is the country has nuclear weapons. They have tactical nuclear weapons, and they have strategic nuclear weapons, and so you can't just dismiss them. And they also
hypersonic missiles, so they over. Good.
Got that too. So, and as far as gas, it's interesting because Russia has a storehouse of boundless energy, which no one's ever looked at tapping. And a lot of climate zealots are freaking out about, but they're not thinking about the utility of it. And the tundra is full of methane hydrates. There are more methane hydrates in the subsurface strata of the tundra than anyone can even shake a stick at. And if that stuff were tapped, they'd have boundless energy for centuries. And that's so-called clean energy. Although they're trying to make natural gas not clean, that's a lie.
If according to the Europeans, it's now green. So.
Well, it's always been green. That was the first green. They said, let's all switch to natural gas. It's clean, but it's all about taking people off energy and turning us into serfs. It's not about clean. That's a lie. Because every time the goalposts are put in place, they're moved. 30 years ago, we got to go to natural gas. It's clean burning energy. It produces almost no emissions. Now it's a horrible climate change. It's not
Look,
true.
I mean, you obviously know work in the energy sector, but I stopped following the hypocrisy. Everyone has got a story to spin. Nuclear guys don't want to admit that maybe it's too expensive.
Or dangerous.
Gas guys don't want to admit that there's geopolitical implications. Not that simple. And solar and wind guys think it's heaven on earth, and the whole world is going to run on solar panels tomorrow morning. So,
and they're all full of crap because none of them are objective. They don't tell the truth about any of their energy.
Yeah, none of these guys tell you the truth. It's just
and the public is easily deceived because it sounds good. I want to do something good, and people don't think about it. Let me get away from that for a second and just give an example of something where people are so stupid. Here's a perfect example of this. Straws, plastic straws. So I was in San Francisco in 2018 when the city banned the use of plastic straws. I was there for the Rugby Sevens World Cup.
But for the banned it.
Yeah, to save the environment. Okay, first off, oh my God, it's terrible plastic. It goes in the landfill. Yeah, and in 10,000 years, it's gone. It's not 10,000 years. It's 10,000 years. It's a blip in geologic time. It will be gone. It will biodegrade in 10,000 years. The fact that you can't comprehend that because your lifespan is 50 to 70 years doesn't mean it's a terrible thing. So in 70 years, it's gone. It becomes part of nature again. It breaks down. So the rubbish, this all is driven by the big Pacific swirl. Oh, this horrible plastic thing in the Pacific, which is terrible. It's bad, and it breaks down into microscopic little pieces and gets in the food chain because creatures eat it. Yeah, that's terrible. But the problem isn't straws in San Francisco going in landfills and winding in the Pacific. The problem is Asia. 8 rivers in Asia and 1 in Africa provide 99% of the pollution in the Pacific swirl. It's not coming from America. So banning plastic straws here, all that has done is harm people. Safe, hygienic, single-use plastic straws are one of the best innovations for public health that's ever happened. They
taste better than those crappy paper ones.
The paper ones do more ecological damage. They're taken from trees, which are bleached, which damage the water table, and these morons don't even think about it. It just drives me nuts. So another example of people that want to virtue signal, oh, no plastic straws. The same people that want no plastic straws go to Starbucks and get these huge Frappuccino cups that are made out of plastic and think nothing of throwing it into the street. I'm so sick of these fools. And it's the same with Russia. These people going on about a conflict they know nothing about a geopolitical situation they know nothing about. And these people I'm talking about aren't, YouTubers, aren't content creators, aren't viewers. I'm talking about Joe Biden. I'm talking about Joe Biden. That's right. Joe Biden and General Lloyd Austin, who's completely confused. He's more concerned about someone's transgenderism and about teaching people to be racist with critical race theory than he is worried about our national security. This is a mess.
What is your view of Anthony Blinken, by the way?
Winking, blinking, and nod. Idiot that he is. Yeah, there you go. There's my view on him. Since the day he became Secretary of State, I've called him winking, blinking, and nod. We were warned about him by people that know what they're talking about, and they were right. Now, the good news is that, like most of this cabinet, they're too stupid to accomplish anything. So he hasn't done much damage, but he's not really a factor for positive. And we need an aggressive, active. Myanmar, 9 days after Biden becomes president, a military junta overthrows the government. What has Biden done? Nothing. He doesn't even address Myanmar. So we got a conflict in Tigray. What does Biden do? Nothing. Doesn't talk about it. We got a conflict in Cabo Delgado. Nothing. Mali. Nothing. The list goes on and on and on. And what does he do? He throws money at Ukraine. Billions of dollars.
But that's the thing. Like it's not the principled stand against non-interventionism. I get there's some people say America shouldn't intervene, and that's fine. But then do it in principle. Don't just do it selectively. Which is
exactly. And also, I'm not calling for intervention in Myanmar, but I'm talking about addressing the issue. Finally,
diplomatically,
at a minimum, economically, in the press, you talk about. You got this moron press secretary's only qualification is she's a lesbian or a transgender or Haitian or whatever the hell she is. I have no idea what she is. I just know that she gets up there and lies. People ask her a question, she reads from a list of answers that aren't unrelated to her question. So Jean Pierre or whatever her name is, you've got that mouthpiece, use it. You got the Voice of America, use it to talk about Myanmar, but they're very silent on it. I'm not talking about American interventionism, but I'm talking about America's active role in international geopolitics.
Right. And that to me, that's a very important distinction here, because I call for America to lead, at least Ukraine. Here's the thing, and tell me if you disagree with me or not.
Yeah.
When Putin invaded and proposed negotiations, the US should have been there, not to agree with the negotiations, but to lay a few laws down and say, look, we want to mitigate, we want to stop this conflict from spreading to the region, for example,
Yep.
And I understand it sucks. There's a lot of people that say, yeah, but we just need to send weapons and Ukraine is going to bomb the hell out of the Russians. I don't think that's how it works at the moment.
No, and there's actually idiots in DC who are in the policy establishment who seem to think it's a good thing if Russia's weakened. How is that a good thing? having an unstable Russia. I'm not trying to.
Do they know anything from Russian history?
Exactly.
I mean, and especially who's going to replace Putin? Some people have called for a coup in Russia.
This is the same juvenile naivete that ruled the foreign policy establishment when Barack Hussein Obama was the president. Remember Barack Hussein Obama actually actively encouraging the Arab Spring, encouraging people to rise up against their oppressive governments. Millions are dead now. Not thousands, not tens or hundreds.
Victoria Nuland caused the crap in Ukraine under him as well, right?
Exactly.
The 2014 stuff, which was a nightmare.
And what did Barack Hussein Obama do when Russia annexed the Crimea? Nothing. Not a thing. So back to my point, I got away from it. I think ultimately, and I stick by this, Vladimir Putin, and this is where I'm going, Russia's always had this inferiority complex, this oppression. They're always being invaded. They always want to secure warm ports. They always want to, and people say that's tired. No, it's not. It affects the psyche of Russian leaders, all Russian leaders. It does. You need to understand that. Not you, but I mean, people who claim that's not true. But beyond that, Putin made a calculated gamble, one that's not working out well for him now, but he came to the conclusion that, listen, Myanmar, nothing. Coup in Guinea, nothing. Coup, attempted assassination in Niger, a coup in Mali, conflicts in Tigray. This president is unbelievable. Look how he ran away from Afghanistan, lying about a conflict that wasn't occurring and then causing a conflict to occur there. There is no better time to exert our influence and force Ukraine to do what we want them to do than right now by use of force. That's the calculation that I think Putin had in his mind. And he thought it was going to be easy because Biden is a loser. He's a clown. He's demented. He's busy changing his diapers and getting his.
What do you think America should do with Ukraine at the moment? I mean, how do you stop this war from spreading? That's sort of.
Well, number one, quit funding it. Right. We not only did we send Ukraine now $60 billion over the course of this year in additional appropriations that weren't in the budget, we've also included in there $8.9 billion in economic aid. Now, the top 10 recipient countries in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, in 2020 or 2019, anyway, one of those years, anyway, the last year we fully funded stuff, right, received only $8.7 billion. The top 10 countries in sub-Saharan Africa, South Africa, Ethiopia, Nigeria, all of those countries, DRC, they got less money than we're giving in a supplemental bill to Ukraine for economic recovery when their country is being bombed into oblivion. What kind of stupidity is it? Who gives $9 billion to a country to rebuild when it's being destroyed?
And what's the guarantee that those funds will be spent?
That money will be siphoned and taken away. It's just.
BS. I mean, you speak about the military aid. I mean, you can now find javelins on the dark web for something like $30,000.
I'm sure you can.
Okay, now wait for the next Al Qaeda freak to get that, and there's a guy driving a president driving a car in Europe. I mean, that's what's going to happen.
So back to the question you asked about what should the U.S. do? Well, the U.S. should be breaking Zelensky's arm, not twisting it, breaking his arm and threatening to cut off all aid if he doesn't come to the negotiation table. And for Russia, offer them incentives. Listen, we'll back off the LNG thing. We'll back off Nord Stream. We'll take the sanctions off, come to the table. We'll ease up. And here's a timeline. If you reach an agreement in 90 days, everything comes back on the table. You're welcome back. So I'm just throwing spitballing ideas out there, right, but force them to the table. Do you hear any peace negotiations? No. All you hear is America sending more weapons. The Germans sending artillery pieces. The French sending artillery pieces. Everyone's trying to make money off this or to exacerbate this crisis.
And the French, what's it, Hausiter? I can't pronounce the name. They got sold to the Russians on the black market, both of them. So it didn't even get there.
And by the way, in all of this, who's getting away scot-free? Who's a major contributor? Who is a major geopolitical power who made this entire thing possible by concluding oil and food and natural resource deals guaranteed with Russia before it ever kicked off? The Chicoms. Beijing made this possible. Russia only started this conflict after getting guarantees from Beijing to buy their crap and to support them in a non-aligned way. Non-aligned way.
But now when you say, okay, let's theoretically say Biden wakes up and his memory comes back, which is highly unlikely, that he's going to twist or break Zelensky's arm, at least to negotiate for peace. Say him, cut your losses, negotiate the Russians out of power. It will help you economically. That should be the deal to Zelensky. We will help you economically to rebuild Ukraine. We're not going to drop you, but we don't want thermonuclear war. And unfortunately, this kind of there's a balancing scale there. But then the argument goes, well, if we do that, it's going to send a signal to China that we are weak on Taiwan. And I had a debate and argument with a guy on Twitter today that eventually ignored me. I actually agreed with him on Ukraine, and then when I said to him, "Look, we still need to defend Taiwan as a sovereign state," he got like totally crazy because that's going to be another Ukraine-Russia war. Well, what do you say to that?
Well, we are weak on Taiwan. I say that. And before Russia ever invaded Ukraine, I've been sounding the alarm about Taiwan. Now, much to my chagrin, Biden actually talked about Taiwan and said, we're going to defend Taiwan, which I was gobsmacked to hear. I mean, what with all the dirty money he gets from China through his, hookers and blows son, corrupt Chinese deals. Have you seen the videos? Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
This show also has kids watching, you know that.
Oh my goodness. Well, okay. All right. Well, I'm not.
No. I just wanted to drop the topic because I saw them and my mind is really.
Yeah. No, but I mean, so I've warned about Taiwan all along. It's a serious concern. The Chinese are demented about Taiwan. Formosa is something they won't let go of. This is like the New England Patriots not being happy when they're up 54-0 and leaving Tom Brady in to score another 30 points to trounce an opponent. Look, the Chinese nationalists, the Kuomintang, lost. You commies won. They fled to Formosa. Let it go. Let it go.
70 years. Move on.
Exactly. Move on. It was never part of China anyway. It was an island off the coast where ethnic Chinese lived. It was never governed by China.
Yeah, but I mean, even if it was, whatever, the point is they are a sovereign, independent nation. Polls show constantly they don't want reunification with China. And here's the thing that I looked this up today. Guess which country in Africa still has full diplomatic relationship with Taiwan?
Malawi?
No, Swaziland.
Oh, that's right, Swaziland. Malawi changed a couple years ago.
Apparently the Swazi princess loves the Taiwanese. If they good for them on that issue. But that's the only country that still has.
For a long time, Malawi was one of the two. So yeah, they found it.
So what stops us from telling China, sorry, we're going to recognize Taiwan as a sovereign, independent country? Like, why do we have to kowtow to the Chinese revolution?
Well, it's too late now because China's actually got power to do something. They can hurt people economically. Now they'll pay a price, but they actually do something to hurt people, and they've got support. Idiots like the ANC. Oh, look, the Chinese model having multiple parastatals to run our electricity. Oh yeah, that's going to work real well. Yeah. So people actually listen to China. It's comical. I mean, Malawi just got two prop aircraft MA600s from China just delivered. Malawi? They have no Chinese.
They have a military like.
Oh yeah, the Malawi Defense Force. I used to work with them extensively. They're a force for good. They actually adhere to the Constitution and the rule of law. And when the former president tried to use them to squash demonstrations, the Chief of Defense Force, whom I know, refused. He said, "We're not rolling out of the barracks. That's not our role. We don't do that. You haven't declared martial law. You want the military to do it? You have to declare martial law." So he sent the police out, and they killed like 18
Malawi
people.
Impressed me during the pandemic. They were the first country to outlaw forced vaccinations. Constitutionally, there was like a judge ruling order, and they said this is the country. We don't pay enough attention to them.
No, Malawi, the warm part of Africa, I think people should pay more attention to them. They got lots of challenges and issues, but is a country that, by and large, does some pretty amazing things. I mean, I speak well of them, but I know because I live there and I work with Malawi quite a bit. So, but their military also. When Banda became the president, when Peter Mutharika died, and his brother tried to we get them backwards. Anyway, the one is dead. The other one's still alive. Anyway, the brother died in office. And so the vice president is supposed to become the president. In 90 days, you have a national election. People stand for it. Well, the brother, who is a member of parliament, said, no. We're not going to accept this woman as president. So he went to the police. He went to the military and he said, listen, you're going to support us, right? And the military was like, no, we're not getting involved in this. The Constitution says an election 90 days. We're not part of this. You're not going to use us to violate the law. And then as soon as he won the election over her, they started charging the Chief of Defense Force with corruption, all this other stuff because he stood up to them. But anyway, but the military is independent, but that's mostly because they've never been adequately resourced by the government because during the days of Hastings Bond, the original president of Malawi, he had his thing called the Young Pioneers, which was his own paramilitary group. So the Malawi Defense Force was neglected for years, and they didn't have a Ministry of Defense for a long time, and they just kind of languished out there. They didn't do anything. So anyway, Malawi is a shining star in a lot of things, but it's got a lot of challenges. Anyway.
Yeah, sure, fair enough. So just to pivot back to Russia and Ukraine. So you're saying basically the US should negotiate, try and bring this conflict to an end ASAP, and not drop Zelensky, but also tell it, look, this is not. I mean, nuclear war is more important. Not having a nuclear war is more important than
So let me ask this question. Who exactly are we supporting here? Zelensky has banned opposition parties. That's not democratic.
Yeah.
That's not brave. Zelensky and the government have banned the use of Russian in language, in school, in media. You can't speak Russian when a huge percentage of the population are ethnic Russians. That's xenophobic and it's illegitimate, undemocratic. And they've just banned, what else did they just ban this week? I mean, this is not a democratic government. They're totalitarian frauds, and they've always been totalitarian frauds under Zelensky. You know, it's funny, a couple of years ago when Zelensky was elected to office, Trump called him and congratulated him. And then the Democrats tried to use that phone call to impeach Donald Trump. And now the Democrats are busy licking his boots and testicles on a daily basis. What's going on here?
Okay, but the argument is still that of all the problems, in Ukraine is still a bit more democratic than Russia, who is, completely lost the plot, who is a little more democratic than Turkey, which is a NATO member, just to add context.
Turkey is not remotely democratic. It's run by an autocrat and a pseudo-theocracy. Erdogan is a human rights violator. He's a criminal, and he should be prosecuted by the ICC.
But the Ukrainians did elect Zelensky democratically.
Apparently we elected Biden. That's what I was told.
Right, but isn't that something though to, sort of to say, well, it's not nothing.
No,
I get the Russians being banned. I get this new Nazi
elections mean nothing.
Okay.
Emerson Mnangagwa was the president of South Africa of Zimbabwe. Not legitimately.
Yeah, but he got into power through a coup d'etat. That was more peaceful than the elections, by the way.
Well, then he was elected after that. Well, he stole the election, but he's elected after that. Anyway, no, but the point is elections, that people think elections are an indicator of democracy and freedom and liberty. They're not. They're not. Elections are manipulated all over the world all the time. And we had Barack Hussein Obama paying groups to undermine Benjamin Netanyahu in his election in Israel. And no one ever called him on the carpet for that. But the point is that elections aren't the barometer. Freedoms, liberties, and due process, the rule of law, those are indicators. And there's none of that in Ukraine.
Respect for minorities, which
that's another one too. Yeah, it's but I mean, but to me that should be a given. But yeah, you're right to point it out. So the thing is that elections mean nothing. The fact that Volodymyr Zelensky was elected just means he's the better used car salesman who was more photogenic. Same with Trump winning. Trump won because people were so angry about the country. Didn't mean he was the right guy. Now, when he was elected, he governed as arguably the single most conservative one-term president in American history. I'll give him that, and I voted for him twice. The first time, this was me voting for him.
That's right.
Second time was like, held my nose the first time.
So you make the argument that it's not worth America's interest to intervene in Ukraine. Basically, Mearsheimer's argument. Right?
It's not in our. Oh, good. John Mearsheimer and I are in great company. Then it's not in America's interest to fuel conflict in Ukraine. It is in America's interest to end the conflict because it's having repercussions around the world. The fact that we're not starving of wheat, we produce all the wheat we need, and we export wheat around the world, isn't going to affect us. Other than it might drive the global price up for consumers. But we aren't going to starve from wheat in America. But it does affect Africa, and impact in Africa affects us. It does affect Latin America. It does affect European countries. All of that has a knock-on effect, plus the energy issues, the uncertainty in the energy markets. All of that is to our detriment, our strategic detriment. So an end to the crisis in Ukraine, the conflict, is in our interest, and therefore the United States should be engaged geopolitically, but not sending arms to Ukraine. That's enough. Stop fueling this. So force people to the negotiation table, and if they don't, then turn your back on both of them. And let them duke it out. And eventually they'll start to wear each other out and they'll come looking for help. That sounds harsh, but it works.
No, look, I mean, let's face it. At this stage, the U.S. taxpayer is paying for the Ukrainian government. You're paying their salaries, right?
Well, we're paying for the AU. Why not? We're paying for the AU. We pay for the entire healthcare sector in
if America tomorrow says to Zelensky, you're going to negotiate and talk to Putin, and I know Zelensky speaks Russian, that conflict will come to an ending. I mean, it does still feel a bit, though, that you'll drop the Ukrainians because they were invaded by the Russian forces. So
it depends on the outcome. If they have to give territorial concessions, then it may appear as if we did abandon Ukrainians. If there's no territorial concessions, there's just, respect for minorities or laws or something like that, and, access rights, then it won't. It just depends on the outcome.
Isn't that what the Minsk II protocol, by and large, the Minsk II agreements by and large concluded before the war started, which is that
I think that everybody's forgotten about the Minsk protocols.
But that's basically what they came down to. So it's
I know.
we just blow a hole into Ukraine, threw a lot of weapons into the pit, send a lot of young kids to their death, and the likely outcome that we're wishing for is something similar to the peace treaty that existed beforehand.
Well,
that's just so criminal.
Let's look at this another way. All right. So what do we hope to get for Ukraine? Obviously, the war to end. Ukraine wants the war to end, wants Russian off its territory. So then what? Do they want reparations? Do they want to ban Russian in perpetuity? Are they going to continue to ban opposition parties? What is Ukraine's end goal? What is their end state? I mean, that's the question you have to ask if you're going to take that approach.
I.e., join the European Union, but that means they need to respect minority rights.
Should never happen. Should never happen.
You don't think they should join?
I don't care. They can join the European Union if they want to be slavish fools to a freaking bureaucracy in Brussels. More power to them. If they want Brussels to tell them what color the light bulbs have to be and how many times they can flush their toilets and how many liters they can't have in the bowl, they are welcome to it. But not NATO. Not NATO.
Okay, so you're still going Finlandization, basically.
Yeah, exactly. But if they want to join the European Union, fine, whatever. I mean, the European Union.
The EU is a two-edged sword. I would agree with you.
The EU is just a French and German club of big boys who tell everyone else how it's going to be. That's what it is. And a bunch of bureaucrats in Brussels who think they know better than everybody else. That's what the EU is.
Yeah, but I mean, when I meet Eastern Europeans, they tend to be in favor of the EU because of the subsidies.
Well, of course, yeah, because because of the subsidies. That's right. Also, because the perception that they're part of Europe and not the East Bloc, which has a negative connotation. And so, yeah, they love it. Look, but it's not just the Eastern European countries. Ireland profited immensely from handouts from Brussels. Ireland got billions of dollars to fix their infrastructure, their roads, their towns, to encourage business to come there. And it's and Spain got that, Portugal got that, Greece got that. Without that, Greece would have collapsed long before.
It's a semi-social democratic / socialist model. But if that works for Ukraine, it's fine. I'm happy with having them in the EU. I don't mind that.
I don't care them being in the EU, but not NATO.
But yeah, my problem is the militarism there. And then also we should also call an elephant in the room. There's some pretty messed up far right people in Ukraine as well.
Yeah, sure. That's true.
Yeah. That needs to be handled with. So yeah, that's sort of what we wish for. But I mean, that's Minsk too, basically, because but do you think Russia's going to give back Donetsk and Luhansk? Crimea's gone. Let's face it.
I think the only likely outcome for the Donbass going back to Ukraine is if Putin has a massive coronary and dies, and someone's looking for an out, so they won't take the heat. I don't think that Putin can let the Donbass go. I really don't.
It's too much. He's too deep into it already.
Yeah, he's put too much blood and treasure in this. I mean, unless he gets something. I mean, unless something else happens somewhere else on Russia's borders that becomes another distraction. Like, okay, we had to leave Ukraine, and we've negotiated a deal. They have semi-autonomous status in Ukraine. That's what we're always looking for. That would be the only way he could do away with it. But he can't just walk away from these because these idiots will probably go across the border and attack Russia after it's all over. Donetsk and Luhansk. I mean, they would probably do something like that. Start attacking Russians on the Russian side of the border. Seriously, no. But it's the problem with these conflicts is they become face saving at some point. And then they become all encompassing, and that's the problem here. So
that was the problem with many of your Middle Eastern conflicts. It's just too expensive to maintain over a long run, and it's not good for your national security interest.
No, and Russia has put itself in a very weak position, not vis-a-vis the West, but vis-a-vis China. And no one's talking about that. I don't see any analysts talking about how dependent Russia is becoming on China now. And that ought to disturb everybody in the West. One of the world's largest geographic country, one of the richest natural resource countries in the world, one of the countries with great potential, which is not realizing, is Russia. And Russia is now hooked at the hip with the communist in Beijing. That ought to scare people in Washington, in Brussels, in Paris, in London. It doesn't, because they're morons. They don't understand geopolitics.
Well, they don't understand geography. That's been very clear. They don't understand how big Russia is. But what do you make of this thing of Russia and Iran at the moment? There seems to be some, I don't know, some new relationship there. Putin has been to Tehran or something.
It's a marriage of convenience. Iran would offer Russia warm water ports if they gave them access. Iran is a great foil against the West. That's the real reason why they're talking to Iran. Also, Iran is 6% of the world's oil, or 4%, something like that.
Yeah, but I mean, the US, you guys, I mean, despite Biden, is still. I mean, you're so energy independent at this stage. I know they say you've lost a little bit of it, but it's not really a threat to U.S. interest. And oil is going to play a smaller role.
Well, Iran's oil is not a threat to our interest, but who buys Iran's oil? China, South Africa, and the ANC.
South Africa buys it?
Yeah, South Africa buys Iranian oil.
Like, what is the story? Like the ANC is like friends with all the despicables.
Oh, the Cubans, the East Germans, the Chinese, the Russians. Yeah, because they're vile crapheads. So here's the problem. The Cold War, similar thing. So Giap was the first issue. So Giap in Vietnam approached the Americans and wanted America to support, North Vietnam. And what happened was an American attaché who was there for the meeting died or was killed or something like that in Vietnam. And they never concluded that discussion. And so he never got support for the United States. So he looked elsewhere and he got it elsewhere, got it from the Soviets and others, and wound up being a commie. He was just a nationalist. He wasn't a commie. He became a commie because that was path of convenience. And the same thing with the ANC. Now, not the Pan-African Congress. They were always commies, but the ANC wasn't a communist organization. The ANC started as an organization for the rights of majority population in South Africa back at the turn of the 20th century. Had a different name, and that became the African National Congress. So it became commies because it was a marriage of convenience. When they were looking for help after Rivonia, they weren't getting help from Washington or from London or from Paris or Brussels. They're not going to get help there, especially the European colonial powers aren't going to help them. So where do they get help? Where do they get succor? Where do they get training? Where do they learn how to be murderers and terrorists? Well, the German Democratic Republic, Cuba, Soviet Union, Communist China, all of them offered aid, succor, training, and assistance. And that's how they were raised. These idiots like Dr. Beetroot went to Russia and got her medical degree in Russia. And so, and that's also where she became a raging alcoholic, and the list goes on and on. And so this affinity for this failed form of governance, this abomination to humankind, socialism and communism, is picked up and it's inculcated and it carries across generations of these people. And it takes a long time for it to disappear. And
the system has to break before it disappears. The country has to. I mean, I don't know how bad South Africa can get yet before Gwede Mantashe realizes that you need to privatize Eskom, or at least just.
Well, now he wants to create another Eskom.
Yeah, no, I mean it's such a. But I mean that is so typical of the ideology, and that's, by the way, one thing that I mean, I know you don't suffer from this, but many Americans suffer from. You don't get revolutionary ideology. I mean, people would ask me, why is it that South Africa didn't build energy, projects 15 years ago? Why didn't we expand the supply 15 years ago when we should have? Well, I mean, on economics argument, there's no rationale for it. But if you listen to the guy's ideology, it makes complete sense what he did.
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, and that's the problem. And so, I mean, look, this week, lots of press coverage from the fawning fake stream media in South Africa about the South African Communist Party leadership change. Who cares? Blade Samani, I don't care. He should just go away. These people are useless. Their ideas are bankrupt. Show me one thing that they've ever accomplished anywhere in the world with communism that made anyone's life better, unless they were a connected elite cadre. There is no example.
But I've got a question for you on AFCOM, since you were part of it. What does it do? Like, what is like the role of that in Africa?
Sure. Well, first off, you have to understand the bigger picture of unified combatant commands. Okay, so unified command means it's a joint command. Joint means multi-service. So you have a command that has different services. It has to have two or more, and usually has all of them. So Air Force, Marines, Navy, Army, and so all of them, now Space Command. So all of them, you'll have representatives from those different commands who are part of a structure. So you can have a general and admiral in charge of these regional commands from any of the services. But there are traditional, Europe was almost always an Army officer. There's occasionally been Air Force, even had a Marine recently, which is weird, but there aren't many Marines in Europe. But anyway, so you have unified specified commands. What the United States did after the Second World War is it, over decades, came up with this. In 1986, a watershed piece of legislation was passed as a consequence of the debacle in Grenada. You may remember that in late 1983, the United States invaded Grenada, ostensibly to rescue American medical students. That was true, but it was also because there was a communist regime there that was getting a foothold in Latin America, and the Reagan administration said no. So we went down there, and a very successful invasion, but it was a near disaster. The Navy couldn't talk to the Army. The Army couldn't talk to the Air Force, who was landing them in planes. So they couldn't link up. It was just a total mess. They needed naval gunfire for support. They couldn't get it because the radios couldn't talk to each other.
It sounds like the Russian invasion, huh?
Yeah, it does. It sounds like the Russian invasion. It wasn't a combined arms operation. That's a good point, actually. So as a consequence of that, we went through something called Goldwater-Nichols, named after Senator Barry Goldwater and another one named Nichols. So Goldwater-Nichols was the seminal piece of legislation that affected the U.S. military to this day. And it called for joint commands, joints. Now they had the precursors to this, and so they just codified here and changed it a bit. So we have specialized ones for technical things like Transportation Command, Transcom. They're responsible for coordinating all deployments, ship, airborne, whatever it is, all around the planet for all the services. And there's Joint Command based in Missouri. And then you have regional commands. You have NORTHCOM, which was created after 9/11, North American Command. You have SOUTHCOM, South American Command. You have EUCOM, European Command, PACOM, which is now Indo-PACOM because they're recognizing the importance of the Indian Ocean, Indo-Pacific Command. And they created Africa Command. Now, these commands exist because whether we like it or not, and people can take offense, but get over it, the world is a place in which the United States finds itself engaged and deployed to, whether it's tsunami relief, earthquake responses, famine, hunger, combat, counterterrorism. We have operations, professionalization of foreign forces, defense agreements, multilateral exercises. So these commands are responsible for coordinating all these activities. They get a budget. They have a 4-star general or admiral who must go to Congress every year and openly testify about what the budget's for, what they're hoping to accomplish, what the objectives are, and what they've done. It's a matter of public record so that there's transparency for it. Now, there's, of course, classified things, but that's a small portion. And they do everything. So, for instance, when the Africa Command was stood up, I was interviewed by the United Nations Radio in Liberia, and they said, so will this take over the sovereignty of African countries? I'm like, no. We have these commands all over the world. We've not usurped anyone's sovereignty. That doesn't mean we don't have troops in countries. We have status of force agreements, and we have defense agreements and diplomatic agreements with some countries in which we place troops and bases. But that doesn't take their sovereignty away. And this would be, and I said, in 1992, when
you were invited in by the states.
Yes, exactly. So, for instance, in Africa, despite the lies of this leftist who's always lying about America, I can't think of his name right now. He says America has like 78 bases in Africa. He's full of crap. We have one base.
Not Noam Chomsky.
We have, no, not Noam Chomsky. We have one base in Africa. It's in Djibouti. It's called Camp Lemonnier. It's been there since late 2001, negotiated after 9/11 with the Djiboutian government. We pay over $50 million a year for the basing rights, which is outrageously high. And we use it for operations.
And just for the records, the Dutch and the Chinese and everyone else, there's a lot of bases.
There's a Japanese air base there. There's a Chinese naval base there. There's a French forces base there. Yeah, there's lots of folks there. But we weren't the first. The French have always been there. They used to have a battalion station there, and they reduced it. Now it's gone back to the battalion. The Chinese
I studied with a few guys from Djibouti. They were happy to have the French there.
No. Well, the Djibouti are happy to have anybody there because the country's just a dust bowl. It's like Mars has more activity going on.
They flip and rich from the rent-seeking fraud.
Exactly, that's where they're getting it. So that's our only base. Now we often get no, Chris, no. There is American secret drone base in Niger. No, it's not. There is a open public record air base built in Agadir. I get them mixed up. Anyway, one's in Morocco, one's there. Anyway, the one that's in Niger, I think it's Agadez. It's located up there and built at the behest and request of the government of Niger, and it is their base. Now, here's the problem. It costs $10 to $15 million a year to maintain its security and operations, repair things. They don't have the money. So they don't want to maintain it. Plus, they don't have the resources to secure the base. So they've asked us to be there. So they use it as well. It's their base, but we operate out of there with an agreement. And we did build it for $117 million, but it's not our base. I mean, if Niger says go tomorrow, we go tomorrow. And it's as simple as that. We don't own it. We don't have legal jurisdiction there. We're guests.
There were accusations that AFCOM and even the French military, there's lots of accusations. Certain accusations were involved in the coup in Guinea. But that just complete nonsense.
As far as I know, it's complete nonsense. First off, if we're involved in a coup in Guinea, whoever's involved would be prosecuted under the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Okay, but what do you make of John Bolton's recent statements that I planned coups on CNN?
John Bolton is an idiot. I don't know what he said on CNN. I plan coups. Yeah, okay. Thank you, John Bolton. He also lied about President Trump. So his credibility is like this much, Yeah, I met John Bolton at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. many years ago when I was there. He was our ambassador to the UN. And since he left that job, he's been full of shit.
Okay. Yeah, anyway, so that was just there's been some skepticism. I mean, I don't say skepticism. I mean, it's always, blaming against AFCON and things of the sort. And I mean, if the government invites you in, I mean, what's the issue?
Let's put this in perspective. So in 2007, when it was announced publicly, and I knew about this prior to that, was the Pentagon when there was a classified order directive from President Bush. And by the way, they were trying to do this for 30 years before that. They finally got around to doing it. It was prompted by a number of things, but the biggest one wasn't terrorism. People think it was terrorism. I wrote a chapter on this in a book by Stellenbosch University, and the real reason, I know this from the interviews and also from my research, also because I was involved. The real reason why AFRICOM came about is because Secretary Rumsfeld was tired of being distracted by Liberia. He's trying to fight a war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And every 5 minutes, these people are coming over. Sir, they're dumping bodies in front of the embassy. We've got to do something. And every 5 minutes, it's Liberia. He's like, enough. I don't want to hear about problems in Africa. Come up with a command that can focus on Africa so that this doesn't rise to a problem and we can prevent these problems from happening. That's why AFRICOM exists. So, but let me just go back. 2007. Oh, it's militaristic. It's going to take the sovereignty of Africans. Where? We've had AFRICOM now since 2007 as sub-unified command, as a full command since 2008. That's now 13, 14 years of existence. Where has it overthrown a government? Where has it impinged on someone's sovereignty? Where has it undermined security? It hasn't.
I want to make another point here, which just goes totally lost in this rhetoric. Since the dawn of time, states have, let's call it, violated sovereignty, and I'm putting it in inverted commas. Since the dawn of time, it is obvious that the US, given your economy, given who you guys are, whether it's luck, whether it's destiny, or whatever it is, you have enormous influence in the world. And with that comes power relations, with that comes military power, all these things that come with, let's call it empire even. And, Africa is an unstable place. So I have no issue with US military there. I have no issue if it brings stability to the region. And I think that gets lost in the mix because would you want the US to withdraw from Africa? See how many conflicts we had before we had AFCOM. So, I have in a bigger sense, I have no issue with it. If there's dodgy stuff like what Bolton is saying, yeah, sure, prosecute the guys. But I have no issues if there is a military overseas. I have a question, though, if it's sustainable in the long run for the United States, if they can afford it, if your budget can afford it.
Well, as I told an admiral, retired admiral, who was the number 2 in the J5 at U.S. Africa Command when I was responsible for the Southern Africa Division, I went to him and said, sir, you're coming up with lines of effort for Africa Command for the focus on what the command's trying to accomplish, and there's nothing for Southern Africa. I said, sir, there's a very serious issue here, and you need to be aware of it. There are pirates operating off of the coast of Somalia, and it's getting global attention now. If they are pressured by commercial ships that fire back at them or navies that interdict them from the Combined Task Force 150th and 151, which are multinational task force operating in the region, then those pirates aren't going to go away. They're simply going to operate further south. There's a region of Africa that is ungoverned. There's no maritime presence whatsoever, and it's a real threat to commerce. And that's the Straits of Mozambique, between Madagascar and Mozambique. And if we don't do something about this, then they're going to be operating there. Chris, you have to understand, we are a limited command. We don't have forces. It's an economy of force mission here, and we can't make it a focus. And my response to him was, sir, you don't need a fleet to make it a focus. You don't need $1 billion to make it a focus. You simply need a senior leader who says it's important and takes concrete steps to ensure that it's public awareness, that does negotiation, that helps forces in the region become better occasionally. But, it doesn't take your national treasure to be effective internationally. Right. Donald Trump was a loose cannon, but guess what happened? Did North Korea launch intercontinental ballistic missiles over the Sea of Japan, over Japanese airspace after Donald Trump met with Little Kim? No. What did we spend on that? A meeting in where? Where did they go? Thailand or Vietnam or where they went? But we didn't spend nothing except prestige, and it didn't cost us anything except the media in America lying about, look at all these kowtowing to North Koreans.
That is what frustrates me, though, about this whole thing. People see negotiation as a form of appeasement. Everything is Munich. Everything is like, every time you want to, if I say negotiate with Putin, automatically I am Naval Chamberlain. Who, by the way, just for the record,
whoever said that to you is an idiot.
Yeah, but just by the way, even that appeasement brought some temporary peace to the region. Okay, of course, Chamberlain was horrible, and of course, Hitler, and everyone knows the Second World War.
Well,
that's the exception.
The problem with Chamberlain is he was hoodwinked. That was the problem. And so people think of a negotiation. See, this is why the whole thing with WikiLeaks is so abominable. Julian Assange, he's not a great person. He's a criminal. And he's taken stolen information, which he has no right to, and he's cost the lives of millions of people.
But the argument is he hasn't broken a law as a journalist. He hasn't.
He's not a journalist. He's a thief.
So you maintain that he should be prosecuted. So
of course he should prosecute. When you commission people to steal things or you trade in stolen material, that doesn't make you a journalist. It doesn't make you a journalist.
My only critique against him, look, I personally wouldn't like him. I would like him to be charged in the UK. I don't like, or if he's extradited to America, let him be charged immediately. Don't hold him in a cell or something of the sort. If it can go through, but he has evaded charges. I'll give you that. I have an issue, though, that it is sending a chilling effect on people to release state secrets. And then, there should be some outlet. I mean, I don't know how to to frame it, because I understand there is a need for intelligence, there's a need for secrecy. Obviously, you can't have everything free market opens all the secrets all day long. But at the same time, if he did reveal, those soldiers shooting the guys in Iraq, for example, which should be public knowledge. So, how do you square that circle?
Well, I square that circle, but you don't divulge it criminally. There's a process for doing it.
Right.
And if you follow the process and you're thwarted by people conducting criminal acts inside the state, then you go public with it. But there's a legal process for it. It's like Snowden. Snowden made no effort whatsoever to even contact the inspector general in the very organization he was involved in. He's a thief. And dozens of people were executed because of his behavior. There's no excuse for that. And that's not a whistleblower. That's not a whistleblower. So let me give an example of whistleblower. What's his name? The guy who at 3 Mile Island. I can't think of his name right now. 3 Mile Island. He was working there, and Bechtel was covering up the safety things that weren't being pursued. They were overlooking the safety standards for the polar crane that was supposed to be lifted up. It was going to, if it fell back in there, it would have been a disaster. And Bechtel was violating, and so was the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission was responsible for overseeing this, and they were violating the law. And the power utility was covering it up, as was Bechtel, who was supposed to be repairing it, as was the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The gentleman who became the whistleblower told Bechtel he became a target. They planted marijuana in his truck. He found it before he went to work. Otherwise, he would have been arrested for possession of marijuana. They threatened his family. They threatened his job. And they tried to shut him down. He went to the legal process. He went to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, reported, and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission outed him to the company, and that's how he became a target. In that case, there's nothing you can do other than go to the authorities. And that's what he did. And that's a whistleblower. That's not what Julian Assange did. That's not what Snowden did. They got millions of people killed because they're arrogant, self-opinionated blowhards who are all about their own ego and wealth and not about the truth.
I would grant you that they are they've got a grandiose idea about themselves, especially Assange. He had that idea, and I think his own arrogance got him at the end of the day. Because you can only, he was, leaking it conveniently before elections, stuff of that sort. So, he wasn't innocent in the matter. I would grant you that. Although I would maintain, if they charged him, they should have done it already. Okay, he was in the Ecuadorian embassy.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole separate issue. Julian Assange charges should have been done. It's like the guys who are in Guantanamo Bay. The fact that there are people sitting in Guantanamo Bay who've been there since 2003, that's an abomination. That's not American. That's not our system of jurisprudence. Every one of those people should have been charged and taken before a military tribunal, which is the proper process for non-combatants, unlawful combatants on the battlefield. And they should have been convicted or declared innocent and set free. This is a disgrace of George Bush, of Barack Hussein Obama, of Donald Trump, and of Joe Biden, but especially of Joe Biden.
Is it still open, Guantanamo?
Yes, it's still open. We still have a few dozen prisoners there.
I've forgotten about it. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, he hasn't been tried yet, I think.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so.
And that's the guy responsible for 9/11, supposedly.
Well, yeah, he's the mastermind 9/11. If we say responsible, no, that's unacceptable. And I don't accept that. I mean, I have no problem with Guantanamo being. First off, we own Guantanamo Bay. It's our territory, so we're not going anywhere. We'll keep Marines and Navy there into perpetuity. But using it for unlawful combatants, it's a perfect solution. I don't want them on American soil. This is perfectly where they need to be. But they should be prosecuted. Detaining, but look at the people from January 6th. No charges, in prison still. Where is Human Rights Watch? Where is Amnesty International? Where's the United Nations Human Rights Commission? Nobody. They're all silent and complicit. And they're never short for criticizing America. Well, you have the death penalty. You're human rights violators. What about people who have been charged with a crime who've been held in prison now since January of 2021? Almost 18 months of confinement. They haven't even been charged with a crime. This is criminal. This cannot be tolerated. And I'm not some soft on crime, freaking leftist, progressive, transgender, yellow, purple-haired, kissing trees and licking testicles clown. This is not acceptable. We cannot accept this. And no one's talking about it. Anyway, sorry.
But sorry, I don't want to. Just to bring up, that is the thing that I think a lot of people are criticizing, whether it's Assange, Snowden, January 7, whatever. It is that there is some blockage in the US judicial system, that it's almost seen as a torture just to go through trial, given, the stuff you just described. It should be quicker. It should be
you need to make a distinction between the U.S. judicial system, which is multi-layered, and the non-combat unlawful combatants in Guantanamo Bay. That's the military tribunal. That's being held up politically by successive administrations. They're intentionally doing this with the argument they can get.
Why are they doing it? What is the rationale?
They just want these people to disappear, and they don't have the heart to kill them.
Oh my goodness. You know,
That's
like
the bottom line. I mean, you cannot make a legitimate argument that 20 years after 9/11, Sheikh Khalid Mohammed has any information of operational use whatsoever. There's no way.
but because it delegitimizes the whole 9/11 narrative, which is
Of
very
course it
important.
does.
You
And
know,
so did the Bush administration's over-reliance on we're going to Iraq for weapons of mass destruction. That was one of half a dozen legitimate, valid reasons. I'm not saying it was valid to go to Iraq, but I'm saying they had a legitimate case to go. I didn't agree with it at the time, and I was in uniform. It wasn't my place to complain. But they had a legitimate reason to go, and they overemphasized that, and it bit them in the behind. And that's a mistake. And to this day, I have to listen to people who know nothing about what they're talking about. Well, Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction. Yes, they did. We found them.
Okay, but that you know, backfired because now when what do you call it? This story in Ukraine came out, there was intel that said Russia was going to attack, and everyone would say, "But this is WMD's intel is lying." You know.
Well, that's look. I didn't say that. I said that at the time that that Biden is fueling this conflict by making these public announcements. What was gained by telling the press and telling the public? What could have been gained was deterrent actions. The United States could have started flying strategic bombers over the region. The United States could have sent diplomatic signals. The United States could have sent an envoy to Putin to say, no, we are going to do this if you do something. But they didn't do any of that. Joe Biden uses the intelligence community. Oh, Russia's about to invade. This is imminent. And they were right. They disclosed classified. All they did was they gave away our sources and methods of how we collect intelligence. All they did was undermine our intelligence capacity. That's what Biden did. It accomplished something. And nobody believed him anyway, as you said, because, you know, wolf, 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 wolf. Okay, well, little boy cry wolf too often. The intelligence community is used by politicians to the detriment of your safety and mine all the time. And I can tell you as a 3-decade-plus intelligence officer that I've seen it time and time again. Intel, more often than not, gets the story correct. We have incredibly talented analysts across the intelligence community, 19 intelligence agencies, and they do incredible work. And they made predictions that have been ignored by politicians. They have told politicians the outcome. Now, they get it wrong. You don't have all the information. That's the thing about it. It's a difficult thing to be an intelligence analyst. You have to take what's available and you have to look what's possible. And then you have to get in the mind of the opponent. And nobody can do that with certainty. And you're making the best prediction.
And the opponent deceives, like, you know,
of course,
they have their own, and all this stuff. And you sometimes fall for it, sometimes you don't, you know. So
exactly.
That's the way it goes.
So, but
what do you make, by the way, of there's one guy that seems competent that Biden has appointed is Bill Burns, head of CIA. I mean, at least he speaks Russian. That helps a lot. But it seems to me that Biden is sidelining the CIA as well in this whole story.
I haven't really paid much attention to the CIA. Maybe that's because they are competent and quiet. You know, unlike the Federal Bureau of Incompetence. You know, it's and the EPA and the State Department and the Department of Defense, which have all gone off the rails. Maybe there's something to be said that there is something going on. But I'm not really in touch with anybody at Langley of late. And I really don't know what they're up to.
But when you say you were working intelligence, was it CIA or was it just a different?
I worked extensively with the CIA through the years in different locations and have been in Langley.
Are they as plotting as people think they are?
Most of them are not. Most of them are bureaucrats.
You still don't want to mess with them, basically.
No, I mean, look, they've got little tiny arms that do things, you know, and yeah, sure. Without disclosing these, they have that. That's a matter of public record. So, yeah, but I mean, the number of people that are involved in this sort of thing that people think is like, you know, Jason Bourne sort of stuff is really tiny. It's a very small number of people, and they're just a small part of what the CIA does. So, yeah. Yep.
Okay, that's cool enough. Anyway, do you have a last point to make, last topic on this Ukraine-Russian stuff before we close the conversation?
Yeah, I go back to what I said all along. No one really knows what Vladimir Putin's strategic intent was. We can surmise based on what he said, and I think most of what he said were just, you know, boilerplate excuses for trying to achieve what his ultimate goal was, and that was one of two things: a compliant vassal state, which I think is what he really wanted all along. If Zelensky had just done what Moscow told him to do, they never would have been invaded. That's my view, regardless of what happened in the Donbass. You know, the Russians in Ukraine are an excuse for Putin. They're not an existential concern for him. They're just an excuse. There's Russians in
just to make a point on the Russians in Ukraine, many of them define themselves as Ukrainian.
Ukrainian nationals, but ethnic Russians.
But Ukrainians that speak Russian, let me put it that way. You know?
Well, I mean, look, there's ethnic Swazi Swazi who live in South Africa. They're not Swazi nationals; they're South Africans. So yeah, but and there's Afrikaners who live in Botswana and Namibia, but they're Botswana and they're Namibians. They're not South Africans. Anyway, so yeah, so back to that point. So getting inside his head. I think that ultimately wanted a vassal state. And the second thing is that short of that, or not short of that, or maybe in addition to it, if the things worked out well, he had no problem with incorporating the Donetsk and those republics into Russia, if that worked out that way. But based on the attack plan, based on the way they went about this, I think that they were just looking for shock and awe. The Ukrainians would just collapse. And the lack of combined arms operations, the multi-prong attack, which I think was foolish. I think, honestly, all they should have done is had a two-prong attack. They should have come from the Donbass, and they should have come from the Crimea, and meet up, consolidate, and then look to the Ukrainians. You want to end this now, or should we continue? I mean, with a plan to continue. That's what they should have done. Anyway, but, it's but folks, you've got to stop. I don't think anybody's even paying attention anymore, to be honest. So I don't say you got to stop. But people go on CNN, even generals and admirals and foreign ambassadors and, defense ministers who talk. Most of them are talking with a dog in the fight. Either they want the fame and attention of being on television, or they're looking for something, and they're looking to be hired, or they're trying to curry political favor. Very few of them are objective.
They work for think tanks mainly.
Or they work for think tanks. Very few of them are objective people who are trying to tell you the truth about what's going on. And even if they are, none of us have the answer. Nobody really knows except Vladimir Putin, and not even to circle around Vladimir Putin. He could be deceiving them. He may tell his staff what he thinks he wants and what they're supposed to do, but that doesn't mean that's what he wants to do. We won't know unless the guy tells us, and he's a master liar. So even if he tells us what his plan was, maybe it's not true. So the bottom line here is that the United States has a role to play here, and it's not arming, equipping, and fueling a conflict, which is what we've been doing under this inept president. We should be forcing the parties to the table, and we should be trying to end this conflict. And we're not doing that. We're trying to expand it.
Or you should tell the Europeans you solve it.
No. Europeans are useless. I know you live in France. Europeans are useless. They can't be trusted with anything. Oh, that's going to offend Europeans. But listen to me. They pull the same crap in the Balkans, in Yugoslavia. This idiot in D.C., Bill Clinton, and his 9,000-year-old Secretary of State, Warren Christopher, said, okay, Europeans like, no, this is our back door. This is European security. We'll take care of it. And so they send little white helicopters down to Croatia, and one of them gets shot down, and run away. And it's like Monty Python. You silly Englishmen are fought in your general direction. That's what happened in Yugoslavia. And so they said they had it under control. They did nothing diplomatic to exert the proper pressure on the parties like Tudjman and Izetbegovic and Milosevic and all these jackals there, and Radovan Karadzic. They let the whole thing go to crap. They let the Bosnians foolishly have a referendum for independence, which was a dumb idea. No. And the list goes on and on. The Europeans said, we got this. And what do we get? 50,000 children born to Bosnian women as a consequence of gang rape. Born. Wow. Not the women were raped, 50,000 children born. And we still have those children alive today who are now in their early 30s.
And the bombing, do you think the bombing of Belgrade wouldn't have occurred if that happened as well? And
well, there would have been no need to bomb Belgrade, in the Chinese embassy. Oops.
Well, Chinese embassy is one of them, but, the radio tower and all that crap that went along with it was...
No, but I mean, but listen, the Europeans said they had this under control. They didn't. And look at the disaster we dealt with. I mean, that's, I find it hilarious to when Ukraine erupted. Oh my gosh, how could this happen in Europe? Did you miss the Balkans? Did you miss Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia's 9-day conflict? Did you miss Macedonia? Did you miss Kosovo? Where were you people sleepwalking through this? I lived through these events. I predicted these events as a young officer, and I was right. And, Europeans can't be trusted with their own security. I mean, they freeload off the United States for decades. I mean, the Germans spend like 0.6% of their GDP on defense. It's an embarrassment.
But they're spending it on the green stuff, That's
oh, thank God for that. Yeah,
that's where the military spending is going. They don't have time for that.
But they freeload, and they get away with it because we are stupid enough to spend our blood and treasure. And finally, some American president, after 6 decades of carrying the water for Europeans, which I have no problem with as long as they contribute their share. Finally, a president says, hey, you need to start contributing. And then the press lies about it. Trump's pulling out of NATO. No, he isn't. It's bluster. He never had any intention of pulling NATO, and he doesn't have the authority. He doesn't have the authority to pull out of NATO. Only Congress can do that.
So just to get your position on this, you would like NATO to stay, just the Europeans to start playing a little bit, because ultimately NATO is for their security.
Yes, NATO is arguably one of the most successful and best defense and political alliances ever created on Earth. And it should stay as a political alliance, and it can stay based in Brussels. I'm fine with that. We spent $1 billion for new headquarters there, and it should be a military alliance. And I have an issue with expansion into Ukraine. Shouldn't happen. And Georgia shouldn't be part of NATO. I have no interest in that whatsoever. But NATO should continue to exist. But Europeans need to carry their share of the load. They all agreed politically to a percentage of GDP, just 2%. 2% of GDP for defense. That is an abysmal figure. We spend over 3%, as much as 4%, and we've done more than that in the past. And we did that for their defense. It's time for them to start carrying. And by the way, paying retirement salaries for military is not a contribution to defense, which the Brits claim. And so they claim they're 2%.
Okay, but then just before we in Europe start paying for that, what about those US cities in Germany all funded for full gym equipment and stuff from the US military, and that massive overhead that you've got?
I don't know what you're talking about.
There's a massive amount of waste from NATO spending as well that is occurring.
Like, no, but okay, that sounds different than what you're saying.
They should cut the meat as well. Like if the taxes go up, the meat should be cut as well.
No, I'm confused. You said there's a massive U.S.
There's like German towns, like towns in Germany where there's like NATO towns, they call them, something of the sort. Where there's
no such thing. I've spent a third of my adult life in Germany. I've never heard of that term before. NATO towns. Okay, I've been all over Germany.
The argument goes that
this must be a French press nonsense.
maybe it's the French press. So there's as well.
No, but let me put this in perspective. Okay, in 1990, there were 287,000 active duty U.S. Army soldiers stationed in West Germany, not Germany, West Germany. I was one of them. 287,000 plus family members, spouses, and children, plus Department of Defense civilians working for the Army and the Air Force and such. All of that put together, you had 160,000 Air Force personnel. You had 100,000 civilians working for the military, and then families. There were 1 million Americans living in West Germany with the Department of Defense ID card. So all affiliated, either family members or active service members or civilians working for the military. Plus, we had a German workforce of like 70 or 80,000 working force out of 62 million people in West Germany. So every 63rd person in West Germany was an American with a DoD affiliation living. We had our own petrol stations all over the Autobahns in southern Germany. We had our own communities where they're closed communities where only Americans live. We had our own bases and things. That's all gone. That's all gone. 1 million Americans. We have 28,000 U.S. troops in West Germany. That's a joke. That's a joke. That includes Air Force and Army. We have a handful of bases. The money we spend in Germany is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. So that's all gone.
Do you have in Europe?
In Europe, total, we have about 100,000 across Europe. Maybe a little bit more.
That's like less than the UK Army, I think. So yeah, okay, fair enough on that point.
No, the UK Army's down to about 60,000, I think it is, but the UK military is over 100,000. Yeah. No. I mean, we still have significant presence in Italy, which we've beefed up since we reduced German presence. It's actually almost as large as Germany now, and a significant presence in Spain. And that's most of our troops in Europe and UK. We used to have troops in the Netherlands.
You see, there's another debate you're going into. I don't know how much time you have, but
it's fine. Go ahead.
There's a pacifism in Europe as well towards the military. Okay, and the reason is America has been carrying the tab,
right?
For a very long time. Now that the Germans are finally increasing the military spending, everyone is panicking about German rearmament is going on the continent, and all of these arguments. So. Should America not just?
But let me put that in perspective too. Once again, people are coming at this from perspective. They have no historical reference point. Germany was heavily militarized. There were 485,000 West German soldiers in the Bundeswehr. There were 200,000 in the German Democratic Republic.
But so Germany conscription back then, right?
Yes, they still have conscription. It hasn't gone away. Germans have conscription.
No. Okay.
No, I don't think so. They still have conscription. I have relatives in Germany, and they've served in uniform. You have volunteer forces, but you also have conscription. But a lot of people don't. They don't call many people up. But they had 700,000 German troops between the East and West in 1990. They merged them together. They reduced the size of the German force from 700,000 down to just over 300,000 now. I think I haven't checked recently, but it was 320, 340. It might have gone down to 260. That was the plan. But the Germans are a shadow. So them increasing defense spending is not a threat to Europe. They have a fraction of the troops they once had. It's expensive to have a military. Maintaining aircraft, maintaining bases, maintaining medical systems, maintaining artillery systems, tanks, that takes a lot of money, plus innovation, training, all that takes money. We're not even talking about deployments. So the Germans are not a threat to Europeans, and the people that say that have no historical perspective. Just 30 years ago, Germany had an army that could have invaded France. It can't invade France today. Maybe it should, but it can't.
So okay, so I mean, no, it's just the Europeans are debating this at the moment. They always
they're uninformed. They're uninformed. I mean, they're seriously uninformed.
Remember, we've got 2, if not 3 generations now that haven't been to war with the army in Europe.
Exactly. So, and don't study and don't know history. I mean, I've lived this. I've lived it. And by the way, I can't just go, well, I've lived it. Great. But I know the history that came decades before I was alive. But people don't reflect on this history. The Germans were militarized against their own wishes. They rearmed, and most Germans didn't want that after the war, but that was pushed by Adenauer, and it was the right decision. And then the formation of NATO, which by the way, people think was a reaction to the Warsaw Pact. It's the opposite. The Soviets created the Warsaw Pact in reaction to the creation of NATO. NATO came first. Yeah. Anyway,
there's a quote, by the way, of Eisenhower going around that says something: if all American troops haven't been withdrawn from Europe in 15 years, this project would have been a complete failure. I don't know if you know that quote. I
don't know the quote, and I don't know if Eisenhower made it when he made it, but he was wrong. Yeah. I will tell you that the reason Europe was prosperous, the reason Europe could fancy around and play this stupid game with social welfare, which I think is asinine. The reason they could get away with that is because we carried the water, we ensured their security, we put a nuclear umbrella under them, we took the risk of deploying Pershing II missiles in the midst of horrific political opposition, which caused eventually the collapse of the Soviet Union. We did that. Yes, our European partners were involved, and the Germans, the French, and the Brits, when Dutch and Danes at one time spent their share, but they retreated from that, and they've forgotten that. Europe would not have recovered from the Second World War for 5 decades had it not been for America. And I'm not just talking about the Marshall Plan. I'm talking about our umbrella of security, which made it possible. And, so Eisenhower was wrong.
Marshall Plan was one of the great successes of American foreign policy, and the rebuilding of Japan, by the way. That is
the rebuilding of Japan is absolutely one of our greatest successes ever. The Constitution of Japan, which was written by Americans, form of government.
And of Germany, it actually worked. You see, the Germans, you just have to give them a flow chart, and the US gave them the perfect.
I don't know that we wrote the Grundgesetz for the Germans, but I know that we wrote the Japanese Constitution. We wrote it, so I know that. We may have had a role in the Grundgesetz. It's possible.
I read some. I mean, on my.
It's possible. I don't know, but I do know the history of the Japanese one. We definitely had a role, but America's role in Europe is what made it possible, and that helped the entire world. Europe developed, its economic recovery came in the 50s, the Wirtschaftswunder in Germany. It's unbelievable what happened there, but also the rest of Europe. And Europe became very well off and very advanced. And then they forgot.
And I mean, it's interesting if you talk to the Europeans, the Eastern Europeans are very much in favor of NATO. The Western ones are a little bit. But
the Eastern Europeans also love America because they hate tyranny. They suffered under tyranny. It's in their living memory.
That's probably the difference. And I mean, that's the Ukrainian argument now as well. Like, look, we are where you guys were 50, 60 years ago. So,
except that the problem with the Ukrainians is they're just as much of a tyrant as the Russians who overruled them.
Okay, but they like the ANC, it's freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
Things of that sort.
Freedom's just a word.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, Chris, thank you very much for this chat.
No worries.
We should do this in the future. And thank you very much.
No worries.
By the way, to your listeners, please subscribe. Thank you.
Yep.